Tēnā koutou katoa, haere mai ke tēnei hui, ke te mana whenua rangitāne, he mihi nui. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning and welcome to the council meeting of the 21st of December 2020, our final meeting for the year. And I'd just like to welcome those in the gallery. So our meeting today is being recorded and it'll be available on the council's website. It's also being live streamed on our YouTube channel as well, in case you leave early and you'd still like to follow along. So just a quick overview of our health and safety. If there is an emergency, we'll follow our committee administrators out to the clock tower. There is a defibrillator located on the ground floor at front of house, and please sing out if there's any concerns. We do have a couple of elected members on Teams today, Councillor Naylor and the Mayor, so we will be jumping across technology a little bit. If you are online and wish to speak, please use the hands up function, and my understanding is elected members in the room, technology is working perfectly so far today. We do have just a slight change with our order of business, and we will take item 15 after declarations of interest. Other than that, we'll sort of proceed through our agenda. So I'll just call for apologies. We do have an apology from Councillor Naylor for early departure. Are there any other apologies? Great, well I will move those, seconded by Councillor Hapera, and I'll invite you to vote. And that has carried 100%. Now we do have one additional item, so we've got a late item for Memorial Park, and that was delayed because the information was not received until after the agenda report deadline, so it needs to be considered so that work can begin during the summer recess. So I will move that we accept that late item, seconded by Councillor Bowen. Is there any comment? Great, I'll invite you to vote. That has carried 100%. Moving on to item 4, declarations of interest. Are there any, Councillor Hapera?
Yeah, I've got an interest in item 5 and 6, please. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson?
Interest in item 13, as I was a commissioner on the panel that heard the original hearing.
Thank you. Councillor Bowen?
And also, as Councillor Johnson, interest in that item. Thank you.
Great, no other items to note. So we would now like to acknowledge Mr Whaiapū for his contribution, and Mr Te Rangi, who is going to be joining us around the council, around our committee table. So would like to invite you down to both of you down to join us at the table. So morena to both. First of all, Chris, we just want to acknowledge your early involvement in the establishment of our partnership structure here in the council chamber. We appreciate the personal contribution that you've made this year, and it's really been quite valued. I think we're all quite proud to come to the end of our first year of this partnership and look back and really appreciate how far we've come and look forward to the future. I think as well we also need to acknowledge the capacity building that we're seeing with Rangitane by having you essentially pass the baton over. I think that's really exciting to see a new face sort of being brought into the midst for us as a council in terms of people that we're engaging with from iwi on a regular basis. So I certainly, we thank you for your involvement, but we are really excited to see additional iwi members brought into the conversations and decision making. So just want to acknowledge you and thank you for that. And I'll hand it over to you to introduce Peter, and if you'd like to say anything.
O tira tēnā rā koe te koro matua tuarua, tēnei tō tātou nei whakaritinga I tēnei ata, I whakataungia nei te katua, o tira I whakatau nei ia māua e kukume mai, e utaina mai ki runga ki raro I tēnei tuanui, I roto I tēnei whare, me ki rā te whare o te raiona, kia kōrero nei ngā kōrero wainganui a tātou I tēnei wā. Nō reira, e mihi ana Alicia, e mihi mai nei ki mawatahi I tēnei wā, o tira koutou nei katoa o te kaunihera tēnā rā koutou. Thank you very much, Alicia, for the warm words of acknowledgement. I really appreciate what you've said, and I too look forward to building upon the relationship as well as the partnership and the many other forms of agreements and whatnot that we can structure together moving forward with Rangitane and our council, local body. Really enjoyed my time here on the Environmental Committee. As I said in my final meeting, I was merely just a placeholder. I'm not the most experienced when it does come to the environment or sustainability. I've got a lot of work to do myself in those areas, and it was only a matter of time until somebody within our iwi became available to be able to take up this role on behalf of our people as well as our community as well. So with that, I'd like to introduce everybody to my Uncle Peter Tarangi, and thank you, Uncle, for coming along today. Hei kānohi nei mā mātou, kānohi nei mā tātou tiwi o tāua nei iwi Rangitane, te whaka waha nei a tātou nei hia, pāna ki te taiao, pāna ki ngā mahi, hau ngā no ki ngā rākau ki te wai Māori me rānei o te whenua. Nō reira e mihi ana ki a koe whai whakaro nui, kia hara mai tēnei wā, kia kōkiri tēnei kaupapa mā tātou ki mua. Nā rungi I tēnā e anko e mihi nei, e tino mihi nei ki a koe I tēnei wā. Huri noa, and just back to everybody else. Have a very good Christmas, everybody. Tēnā koutou.
Kia ora, Chris, mō tō whakaro rangatira mai ki au, ki te whakauru mai ko nei ki tēnei te kaunihera. Kia koutou katoa e hui mai nei, tēnā koutou, mō tō tautoko hoki, mō tēnei tūranga hau ki au. So just to acknowledge Chris for his complimentary remarks, and to the council for your generosity and your warm welcome. So I just want to support the words that Chris has already shared, and to look forward to a good working relationship together in the coming months and years ahead. And similarly to Chris, wish you all a Merry Christmas. Tēnā tātou.
Kia ora, thank you, and a warm welcome to you to our council chamber, Peter, and we look forward to working with you. It'll be great to have your skills and knowledge contribute to our kōrero and decision making, and your agribusiness skill set, knowledge of rangitane, heritage, the planning work, the involvement that you've had with Te Motua Poto will be useful around the council table, and I'm sure that you'll represent rangitane well, so thank you. So, councillors, I'm going to move the resolutions on the screen, seconded by Councillor Harpera, thank you, and I'll open up for any comment. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to briefly comment as Chair of the Environmental Sustainability to express gratitude to Mr. Fapu for a very constructive and good progress in that first year. It was the first year of the committee, and obviously your first year on the committee as well, and we'll always remember you as a very considered voice, both around the table and in our sidebar discussions, and really felt that you brought the absolute best to it, and as the, I guess the first voice of rangitane on that committee, certainly not the last. I'm very much looking forward to Mr. Tarangi joining us in the new year, and good relations there and good progress there in terms of working towards our environmental sustainability ambitions as a city and recognizing iwi's vital role in achieving that. Madam Chair.
Mr. Mayor.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you, Madam Chair, and sorry I can't be with you in person today, but Chris, thank you very much for all the work that not only have you done in that committee, but everything that you're doing for our city, for our relationship, rangitane and the city. Also to you, Peter, I look forward to working alongside you, and I think you'll make a valuable contribution, and I think Alicia has summed up with her words in that we are all trying to work together, and I think we're going to make a transformational shift in the next decade around our relationship, council and rangitane. So thank you both for your contributions, and Merry Christmas.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. I just wanted to tautoko the words of the Deputy Mayor and also everyone else who's spoken. Particularly Chris, thank you for your contribution. Thank you for always being approachable and for really deepening the relationship that we've got between Council and rangitane. I think we all acknowledge rangitane, the kaitiaki of the region, and it's very important for us to hear the voice directly when we're on the Environmental Sustainability Committee and to hear exactly what the rangitane position and worldview is. So thank you for contributing that. And to Peter, kia ora and welcome, and we look forward to having you on the committee and to your contribution too. Thank you.
Right, thank you, councillors. I'll invite you to vote. And that has carried 100%. Thank you. Moving now on to item 5, we have got Rob Campbell here presenting the Palmy bid, and I believe that Amanda is online.
So how does that sound? I think we had a presentation.
Yes, it's just being set up. Thank you.
Fantastic. And I'm not sure, is there a clicker? Sorry to be awkward. Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to present to you this morning. I know you've got a busy schedule, so we won't take a lot of your time. Apologies on behalf of Amanda Martin-Lindsley of the Council, and she's been heavily involved in the Palmy bid as well. She's ill today. The first day off in 10 years, she tells me. I've got no way to verify that. Amanda has been an integral part of getting the bid to this point, working on it for 12 months plus. I'd also like to say thanks to the members of my committee who are here in force this morning. They've been very supportive over the last 6 months in particular. And also the members of council, the staff that have been very useful, David Murphy, Keegan Applin-Thane, Sandra Crosby in recent times, and Hannah White has been very supportive around our work with Elections NZ. And there's been a number of councillors that have been supportive as well, so thank you to you all. The format of the presentation this morning is really just structured around what we need to present to council in terms of the bid policy. So bear with us as we run through in a quite a structured manner. Feel free to ask questions on the way through. I'm much more comfortable with conversations rather than presentations, but there is an opportunity to ask questions later on. So the Palmy bid poll was held during the month of November and spanning into December. We had a 25% hurdle and managed to get 27.8% of the community to vote. Votes for represented just under 61% of the community. Votes against just below 39%. There was one informal vote. Online votes 74% and postal votes 26%. So we believe we have a mandate, and that's why we're here in front of you this morning. Just to refresh on the boundary, and you'll have seen this graphic many times, but really the boundary for the bid will be the ring road with a portion moving up Broadway and Main Street. Properties on the other side, the outer side of the ring road, were included. Residential properties have been excluded, although they will be afforded the opportunity to benefit from any gains the bid might make. Strategic plan, and the strategic plan and the budget, which I'm about to talk to, has been ratified by an AGM of the bid committee. Our vision, Palmy is to be recognised as the best regional city bid. Our mission is to create a vibrant, connected CBD where businesses can feel heard and supported, thrive, and where businesses actually want to be. Key deliverables, we want to advocate for business interests, providing representation for and within the CBD. We want to focus on business growth and retention through marketing, events and public relations. We want to focus on supporting our community through focusing on safety, crime and crime prevention. And importantly, and this is one of the things that we got a lot of feedback on during the poll, we want to connect the community. There's a real feeling that people want to be involved with something larger than just their own businesses. And just to confirm, the strategic plan aligns with Council's strategic framework per the bid policy. Our budget, the targeted rate is $250,000. We propose to establish a promotional fund of around about $100,000 on an annual basis, and that will be rolled over if not used, to promote and celebrate the CBD. In year one, we'll have a little bit of capital expenditure, but that should sort of dissipate in year two, and that will be basically our operating structure going forward. Many bids don't incorporate until after ratification, but we incorporated back in 2019, so that's confirmation that process has occurred. And we have a request in front of you today to incorporate a targeted rate into the long-term plan to support the promotion and development of the Central Palmerston North Business District. We would expect that targeted rate to be effective 1 July 2021. Thank you. I'll open it up to some questions.
Thank you, Rob. First question from Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Rob, for your presentation. I just wanted to ask you about the turnout for the vote and your comment that you feel confident that you've got a mandate. So you know, I understand that you cleared the 25%, which was the bar for making it a vote that could go ahead, but it still seems to me to be quite a small turnout, and I wonder if you've got any concerns about the level of engagement of the rest of the businesses in the bid as a result, and so I'm interested to hear your thoughts on why the turnout was low, whether that's a warning to us about the bid at the moment, and any other sort of comments around turnout and mandate.
Great question, Councillor. I think the turnout in the circumstances was very reasonable. If I compare it to other local body elections that may be, you know, late 30s, 40%, it stacks up against what would be a normal election process with a lot more promotion behind it. We also ran into what was a heavy workload period for retail, running up into the early December period. It was Black Friday. There was a lot of people were preoccupied with what they were doing inside their own businesses. So we feel pretty confident that people were informed about it. Very few people we spoke to didn't understand the process was underway, and the turnout is a reflection, I think, of those that were able to vote and those that had a strong feeling about it. You could call it apathy, but I would say there was a level of comfort that we were heading in the right direction.
Okay, thank you.
Rob, I've just got a question around the voting process, because some of the feedback I heard was that it was the online voting was quite rigorous, and obviously with a multiple step process it's very thorough, and there's quite a high element of security around it, but that can provide some difficulty at the interface. And so I just wondered if you had any data into sort of how many clicks you had on your links that might not have turned into a vote, that people who received their links and their code started the process but perhaps didn't finish the process?
Look, it's a fine question. I don't believe that I have any absolute data. There is, as you suggest, some anecdotal evidence of people trying to click through, and we had to redirect them to another site. The short answer is Elections NZ will have records of that, but I don't have that immediately at my fingertips. I would say, again, anecdotally, a small percentage, there might be, of the total voters, there might have been 5 or 10% at the most that had issues, and most of those we were able to redirect and get through. But I agree with you, the online voting process in particular was rigorous, and reasonably so. We want to make sure that people have the right to vote.
Thank you. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yeah, probably along similar lines, Rob, because I was aware there was problems at the end of the voting period with the online voting process, and you had to extend the voting time allowed. So did you have a sense that some people couldn't engage and that would have made for a higher turnout?
I think possibly. I don't think there was a significant issue, though. I think it was more about they were preoccupied with other things, were aware of what was happening, but just didn't have the opportunity to vote because what was happening in their own businesses. The extension was really, the voting timeline was to finish at 12 o'clock midday, and we arranged to extend it to 5 o'clock that day, just to make sure that there was enough time for people to understand it was the final day. We got a lot of feedback, and particularly that last week, saying, I know it's happening, I'll vote before this day. But then the 12 o'clock cut-off, I think, might have caught a few people out. So that's the reason for the extension.
And that 75%, 25% split between online and postal vote, was that what you were expecting?
I think as the campaign sort of rolled through, yeah, that was what we were expecting. The postal votes were for ratepayers, so landlords, and council officers wrote to them. And so we didn't have as much contact with them as we had with our online voters. So as we rolled through the campaign, it was apparent that landlords probably weren't as engaged, or we weren't engaging them as much as the businesses who we communicated with online. The businesses are the ultimate payers, and so again we feel pretty comfortable that ratio is reasonable in terms of the mandate that we were looking for.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Rob, for the report. Probably on the same lines as Councillor Johnson has asked you, where did this 25% hurdle came from?
The hurdle was set by council officers, and it's indicative of the bid policy in other parts of the country, so that it's been recognised, I think, as a hurdle, a reflection of relative engagement.
And is that a standard?
Yes, yes it is.
And because if my maths are correct, technically 25% was the hurdle, and out of 27%, about 60% or 67%, it's less than 20% of the total members agreeing to that.
Look, your maths is fine, that's correct. But the hurdle was set based on policies around the country, so this is nothing unusual for the Palmy bid.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Rob. I'm kind of sort of around sort of practicalities. Can you give some idea around sort of perhaps the timelines to establish and create any sort of meaningful activity going forward, and perhaps give us some idea how that might have fitted with, perhaps other bids that have been set up around the country. So I suppose I just really want to get a sense of how long it actually takes to actually sort of get things moving forward for
from this point, Councillor. Well, we will be working on the bid has been structured. We've been up and running really on a smell of an oily rag, and we'll continue to do that through to the 1st of July when we're fully funded. The aim would be to have our committee sort of established, and there'll be a few on the current committee that will travel forward, but we will look to restructure the committee and have it as inclusive of the community as we possibly can. 1 July, we'll then look to build an operational team with probably, that team commencing early August. So we'll make headway on that, and we would expect to be up and running almost from the word go on 1 July.
Yeah, thank you very much. So probably confirming that from 1 July through to the latter part of next year, we should be able to actually see something tangible coming out of the bid.
Well, look, I would say absolutely we'll be operating from 1 July. In fact, we were operating on a skeleton staff basis with the support of the Chamber between now and then. So, you'll see us around and about and advocating certainly for the community during that time, as we have been over the last 12 months as well, but we've been working with Council on various projects. We will structure it so that we're all guns blazing and on the road from 1 July, absolutely.
Great, thanks, Rob. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The similar question to Councillor Hancock, just in regards to the time frame, but I wanted to understand how far do you think you'll be down the framework by year 2022? Just what would success look like over that time frame? Can you outline what you're hoping to achieve in those 3 years?
I think success for us would mean, we're actively advocating and partnering with Council on behalf of the CBD, so you'll see us advancing issues that are important to our community. You will see us organising a program of events relative to the CBD, but also reaching out and promoting the CBD to not just the wider city and Manawatu, but other regions as well. So you'd see a program of advertising and drawing people in to the CBD.
Okay, and so when you're saying drawing people in, that's just off other monitoring that will take place, or is that just will become evident because of the amount of activities you're doing to create the vibrancy? I just want to understand what sort of measures can we base it on so we can get confidence in the direction we're heading. Yep,
well, there'll be measures around, and I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. The committee, when it's incorporated and we're up and running, will set the guidelines in terms of our performance, and our community will provide input to that. But we'll be measuring things, I would imagine, like electronic card spend in the region. We'd be measuring things like commercial occupancy rates, perhaps. We'd be measuring things like crime statistics.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Rob, for all the work that you've done and for bringing us the update today. Just a couple questions, both of them around language. At this council table, we're in the process of migrating our language from referring to the square to referring as Te Marae Ohini. I just wondered if within the Palmy Bid Leadership Informative Group, is there a conversation going on about that use of language as well?
No, there hasn't been to date. We've been pretty focused, Councillor, on getting it up and getting it in front of the community, but absolutely would embrace a change in language in terms of referencing the CBD. I understand the background to it, and it's a beautiful story.
Okay, thank you. The other one that I have is around that acronym CBD. I suppose in contrast to language like city centre, and I guess for me at least some implications in there around really understanding the value of that mixed use, live, work, play type thing that might come through a city centre type expression, but CBD has a quite narrow focus in some ways. Just wondering is sort of any reflections on I guess how language is going to be used and sort of inform the future for you guys.
Look, I have to say it's a distinction that we haven't dwelt on. Again, we've been focused on the task at hand in terms of informing the community. I expect very much the community will drive what we call ourselves. I mean, there's been a lot of feedback around even the acronym BID during the process. What does it mean? That sort of thing. And I agree, there is a different connotation between CBD and city centre, particularly when CBD might be more focused on business, and BID is certainly a business organisation, but the city centre represents everyone who lives and works here, and that's what we intend to do as well. So, look, I have no doubt that that'll come under some debate, some scrutiny as we move forward.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Rob. Rob, many of our businesses, English is their second language of the owners, so how have you engaged with them?
Well, the engagement has been through a long process of face-to-face meetings. We've had our representatives on the street meeting businesses for probably the last 12 months. So there's been a lot of face-to-face. We've engaged with people during the voting process via email and also mail. We've had a range of open days where people could approach us. People who have English as a second language, I don't know that we've done anything unusually different. We have endeavoured to communicate when we've met them in ways that we hope they understand. But certainly, the question you raise is a good one, and we need to be focused on the needs of our community going forward, and if that means we need to have a wider process in terms of communication, we will certainly do that.
So are we sure that they have understood the process and that there will be a fee on their rates?
Yep. I believe so, yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions relate to the first recommendation of the request to incorporate the 250,000 program into our the LTP. I guess my question is probably for the officers. Some of the previous discussions around the bid have talked about that some of the activity that's currently undertaken by council could be transferred to the bid. So I'm just wondering if any of our current council's current costs would be reduced as a result of this work beginning, or whether there's any costs that would be offset by
Councillor Naylor, we're currently actually just hearing the presentation at the moment, and the next report is for officers, so we won't be taking officer questions at this stage. Have you got any questions for Rob?
No, I'll hold it over to the next part. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob. There's no further questions, so thank you for coming in today to present.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So I will move that we receive the presentation for information, seconded by Councillor Barrett. Thank you. And I'll open up for any comment. Great. I will invite you to vote. And that has carried 100%. Thank you. Moving now on to item 6, page 11, consideration of targeted rate for Palmy Business Improvement District bid. I'll invite David Murphy.
Kia ora koutou, Madam Chair, councillors. Madam Chair, I understand you've asked for the report to be taken as read, so I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I did just have a question to start off with on recommendation 1, that council incorporate the program into the long-term plan. In terms of decision making, this council today is not considering the draft long-term plan. That is to be done in the new year through Committee of Council and then onto Council to sign off. And so does that recommendation actually need to be that it is referred to the draft long-term plan? But just because it's saying incorporate, which would essentially be making that decision right now, which can't be done.
Yeah, so I think the intent of the recommendation is that in preparing the draft 10-year plan for consideration in February and then approval for consultation, that we include the targeted rate. So the intent is not to. There would still be a subsequent decision in February and March prior to consultation on the 10-year plan.
Okay, thank you. We'll amend that. We have a couple of questions. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, David. My question's around the targeted rate. So first of all, I see that the fixed proportion is to be 50% of the sum collected. So that seems to be quite a high percentage of fixed. When you consider the range of businesses that are in the area to be rated, some will be very small and some will be, into the dozens, if not hundreds of employees. Where did the idea for 50% of the sum to be fixed come from?
So the policy provided for a range of options, but the 50% sum was really a decision of Palmy bid, and they did take advice during that process from Steve Patterson and the council.
So just say to compare to the ordinary rates, what percentage of commercial rates would be fixed at the moment?
I don't have the answer to that question, but I certainly know that obviously the background to the 50% was to try and recognise that there was a certain benefit to everybody for the bid, but then obviously the bigger you are, then the more benefit you receive. So, but I can't answer. Steve maybe answer the question on the broader rates.
Councillors, the fixed component of the commercial rate is usually a relatively small portion at the moment because it's the UAGC, and many of them would have charges that involved things like pan charges and that for wastewater, so the fixed component is usually relatively small. And just to clarify, in terms of the question as to whether 50% is appropriate or not, that is not something that I made personally a judgment call about. It was something that I gave advice about as to what the impact would be at various levels, and the bid group chose the 50% as what they presented.
Thank you for that explanation. And then the second question about the rate is that I see that the balance is going to be based on capital value. Is this the first instance in recent years of rating being based on capital value?
Based on my understanding it is, but again, Steve may want to answer.
Certainly it's the first time this city's allocated or was proposing to allocate anything on the basis of capital value, and capital value in this instance seemed to us, and I did make a call about this, I gave advice about this, it did seem to represent a better way of spreading the load for this particular activity, which we have to be sure in terms of the way we express it that it is an activity of the council that we're looking to fund here as opposed, and we've had advice about that too. So it's the council's activity is to provide funding for an entity that's going to undertake work in the central city or the CBD. So the capital value is seen as, perhaps from my perspective at least, being a better way of doing it than the land value, more representative.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, David, for the report. My question is about the voting rate, and you've been involved in this project all the way through. So when we set that 25% voting return policy, did you expect it to go as close to the wire as it did? And why does 25% give us comfort that there is a mandate for this?
Yeah, we looked at a range of policies across the country. The Palmerston North Business Improvement District policy is based on a number of similar policies from around the country. I mean, I think, I do agree with the comments from Rob in relation to a similar question. I guess while 27.8%, I think it is, seems quite low, I mean, I think if you compare, say, the local body elections and the publicity and the significant profile that comes with that, and we still only get sort of in the late 30s or early 40s, I think 27% on the face of it seems quite low, but if you compare it to the sort of turnout we get to elect a whole council and a mayor, and as I said, the publicity that comes with that, maybe it's not too bad.
So you're comfortable that this does reflect the view of the population?
Yeah, I guess one thing I would say is the beauty of this process in a way is that the council gets to test it for a second time through the long-term plan. So we will certainly anticipate the consultation document for the 10-year plan, including a little bit of a focus on the Palmy bid proposal because it's new. So I think if there is significant concern from other parts of the business community that didn't, or may have voted or didn't vote or didn't feel they were engaged as much as what they would have, then there is an opportunity for that voice to be heard through the LTP as a sort of a, I guess I would say though, Palmy bid have met the requirements of the policy that's been adopted. So the LTP process, I think, should be, the premise will be that it's proceeding, but it's an opportunity to further test it.
Thank you.
Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you, David, for this report. Most of my questions have actually already been asked, and I wonder if this one is actually for you, but we'll give it a go. Page 18 of the reports that are attached to this actually talks about, in point 3, maintain a stronger stakeholder communication strategy and encourage communication between members to enhance some well-beings. And I note that the environmental well-being isn't on there. It looks at the other 3, but not that. And I wondered if there was a reason for that.
Yes, so that's the Palmy Bids strategic plan, advocacy and action plan. So it's probably best for the group to answer that. I'd imagine it's probably an oversight. I'm sure they're not going out of their way to deliberately destroy the environment. But I mean, that might be, there will be a funding agreement if the resolution's passed today and then we go through the LTP, and then it's confirmed through the LTP process, there will be a funding agreement process where we can have a conversation with Palmy Bid about specifics, and we're more than happy to raise that with them, but I'd be surprised if it's a deliberate exclusion.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, David, for the report. Just wanting to understand a little bit about whether there's any sort of administrative effort or requirement sort of on the council side of this relationship to make sure that it's well looked after and supported, especially during inception, but also looking ahead?
I mean, obviously there's going to be the administration associated with the LTP and actually collecting the rate and those things, but we certainly anticipate in the first 12 months, the staff like myself and some of my team who have been involved throughout sort of continuing to work quite closely with Palmy Bid, particularly during that first 12 months. We anticipate there'll be a strong relationship between the sorts of work they're doing and ourselves and other organisations. So I don't think it would be a case of sort of here's the funding agreement and here's the funding. And
yeah. And so the I guess costs associated with that administrative effort and support on the council side, did those sit with the wider ratepayer base, or do those get passed on specifically to the bid?
So we'd anticipate during that first 12 months that while there would be some support, it wouldn't be significant. It wouldn't be any more than what we've been providing to date through the likes of myself, Steve, Keegan, and just some sort of support and connection. You know, we've had fortnightly coffees, that sort of thing, for half an hour just to touch base. So I don't anticipate it would be more than that or significant, and it would be able to be accommodated within existing budgets.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just returning to the question I started asking before, just wondering whether any activity that's currently undertaken by council would be transferred to the bid, and if so, whether there'd be likely to be any reduction in council's cost as a result of that.
So certainly for the first 12 months or so, we don't anticipate that there will be anything further in terms of council's current activities that would be transferred to Palmy bid. The evidence from other parts of the country is as bids build their capacity and their capability, they have the opportunity to potentially take on some components of council's work that are directly associated to the CBD. There's been no detailed conversations in that respect with Palmy bid to date, and if those conversations did happen, then I think it wouldn't be those costs would continue, but they'd be passed over to the Palmy bid. So it wouldn't be a case of the $250,000 would be offsetting any current council expenditure. So the one that has been talked about, of course, is Palmy Unleashed, because that's specifically about the city centre. So, you know, maybe in 12 or 24 months, if the council was pleased with the performance of Palmy bid, those sorts of things could be looked at. And no, that's just one that comes to mind, but it wouldn't be a cost saving. I think that cost would transfer to Palmy bid if a decision was made to look at something like that.
Okay, thank you. Just one further question on the similar issue. So the goal for the bid to promote and celebrate the CBD, do you believe that that's a duplication in any way with council's current activity?
I think it's consistent with council's planning for the CBD, or city centre, sorry. I mean, the reality is city centres across the Western developed world are facing significant challenges. So an additional voice for the city centre and additional coordination, in my professional opinion, can only be a good thing.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, David. David, how are we going to set up for any exceptions that may be coming through to council? Because I'm assuming there's going to be, there'll be some voluntary organisations that are renting space, and in places like Hancock House, I noticed they're not green on there, but Hancock House is in the CBD. So will they be expected to pay this targeted rate, or how are we going to deal with these exceptions?
I anticipate any exceptions would be managed in the same way as the existing rating system. So that the policy provides some exceptions, for instance, council buildings and residential properties, but beyond that, if you're expected to pay rates at the moment, then you're expected to pay, in the city centre, then you're expected to pay the bid. For instance, Steve may want to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there was certainly a range of properties that we took out of the funding that or the maths that we've done to help with the targeted rate.
So you've already done that?
Steve?
Yes, but just can I clarify, the council is paying for its buildings as part of the bid. It just didn't have a vote when it came to the poll. The definition at the moment is that and we'll have to make sure we make this clear when we write the stuff in our in the 10-year plan, that the detail of the rates will prescribe what the properties are that are to be rated, and at the moment it's based on the properties being commercially rated. So that's the description. So we've been through in the process and identified for the moment the ones for this test that wouldn't be rated under that basis, but as part of the implementation we'll do that again, update ourselves on what properties would pass that test.
So there's provision that there will be provision for like voluntary organisations to be able to come to council for dispensation?
We will have to look at how we administer that specifically, but the overall intention is that a property that's rated as commercially would have this targeted rate, and if there was a reason for there to be some sort of remission, that might be handled through the remission policy.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. There's no further questions. So we've got the recommendations on the screen, just noting that we have amended incorporate to refer as per our usual process. And I'll just look for a mover for those. Councillor Barrett, seconded by Councillor Bowen, thank you. And I'll open up for any comment. Councillor Barrett, did you wish to speak on this?
Madam Chair, happy to lead off. Yes, really excited to see this come to this stage, and first would like to recognize the huge amount of work that the community in the city centre, and particularly the business community in the city centre, has put into getting this to this stage. No small feat, so really, really excited to see this come to us. I think Mr. Murphy alluded to it quite well in terms of some of the challenges that city centres face in the world, and we are no different from others and are certainly not immune to the donut effect. And in fact, I would say that some of the district plan and some of the development that has been allowed has actually fed the donut over time and has sort of made it a bit worse. And so it's really, really pleasing to see that we're starting to fight the donut. And to me, this is about actually building back into the city centre and assuring that we have a good, vibrant future for that space, and that vibrant future does include a strong mix around live, work, play, with obviously leadership from the business community in taking us there. I did have a couple questions, as you will have recalled, of Rob and the proponents of the bid around language. And I suppose the reason that I ask those now is I think it's quite important at the outset that language is sort of well set in and established, because it begins to just become accepted and used as is. And so for me, with the inception of the bid, likely in 2021 on a formal basis with the associated funding, a great time to start incorporating the new language that we are working on here, such as Te Marae Ohini, and I think really important to have language that does well reflect mixed use and the vitality that we actually want to build through this bid into the city centre. So overall, absolutely thrilled to see this here. I think it's great value for the city and wish them every success in their future.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. My comments really relate to the rating component of the bid, and I must say that I cannot let this opportunity go by without saying how delighted I am to see that we're rating, at least in a small part, on capital value. And members will know that it has long been my opinion that capital value is a much fairer way of rating. So I was absolutely delighted to hear the comments from the officers that this was generally seen as a better way of doing things, and long may that continue. I do have a little reservation about the 50% fixed, because we do know that the higher percentage of fixed rates that you impose, the more the effect, the adversely disproportionate effect on the smaller businesses that have a lower turnover, but still have to pay 50% of the rate. So I have heard the comments that this has been discussed with the bid, and I'm also reassured by the fact that this will be one of the things that's consulted on in the long-term plan. So if there is an unhappiness, particularly for smaller businesses, with the 50% fixed, then the long-term plan consultation will give them an opportunity to say that. So That's all I really want to comment on. In terms of the overall proposition, I think it's always good to get people that are in an area to take some ownership of that area, and I see the bid as offering that opportunity. But I do hope also that there's continues to be good tie-in from City Council strategic direction and the direction of the bid, because I think that gives us confidence then that things are heading in the right direction. Thanks.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, happy to support this today. I'm amused by Councillor Barrett's "Fake the Donut" picture going forward. I actually think that as a city we've worked really well to avoid some of the donut that other cities have experienced, but it is of course fair to say that all central cities are facing some of the same issues, and I think anything that we can do to support the vibrancy of our central city is valuable. I wanted to comment specifically on the issue raised through questions, both with Rob from the bid and with the officer, around voter turnout, and to note specifically that 27% might seem quite low, but it does, as the officer says, exclude all of council's presence in the central city. And elected members will remember we had that conversation around this table. We deliberately took ourselves out of the vote. So I'm assuming that we would have voted yes, and then the voter turnout would have looked much more encouraging. So I'm actually confident that those who have engaged know what they're engaging with and feel positively about this direction of travel, but also confident, as Councillor Johnson has referenced, that the LTP will give us a kind of belt and braces approach to checking in on that to make sure that those who do have possibly an alternate view can find a way to have their voice heard. In principle, I think it's a principle that we all engage with, that good local government decisions are made as close to the people they affect as possible. And what this bid process does is it puts decision-making in the hands of the people who actually pay for some very specific services, or will do, once the targeted rate comes into effect. So I'm very happy to support this through to the LTP consultation.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Throughout this process, I have always had some reservations about the additional cost onto businesses in the city, particularly at a time that's as challenging as this. So I was interested to wait and see what the outcome of the vote is. And whilst I acknowledge that the vote has definitely met the threshold, I don't consider that it's a resounding mandate to proceed, particularly when only 16% of potential voters have said, yes, we want this. I guess my concern is we don't exactly know how many businesses in the central city aren't comfortable to add to their rates. And for that reason, I'll be voting against this today. Thanks.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I'd have to disagree with the last speaker. There is a mandate here. This is actually good news. For some that will remember, we used to have a city centre marketing coordinator many years ago. And in some ways, this is back to the future. We're the last city of any size to get into a business improvement district, a bid. So it will give, the businesses have voted for this. The policy, which we all signed off many months ago, which we now seem to be debating or questioning, we put that in place. So the mandate or the threshold has been met, and I would hope that we would support this, these notices motion. I understand the Plaza and Downtown, two of our bigger retailers in our city centre, by way of being on the committee, are supportive, and I do know other landlords have signalled a strong desire to have some sort of voice around city centre marketing. So I think this is good. I'd like to congratulate Rob. I know he's worked extremely hard. I know that he was perhaps a little bit worried there for a while, if things were actually going to happen, because basically this is 2 years of work. Also to the committee that have been involved and to the chamber, but also to our city centre portfolio councillors, especially Councillor Harpeta, who has championed this, because there is a need, there is a want to do this. So please, councillors, support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Barrett, would you like a right of reply?
No, thank you.
Right, I will invite you to vote. And that has carried 13 in favour and 1 against. Right, moving on to the confirmation of minutes on page 23. Those are moved by Councillor Barrett and seconded by Councillor Harpeta. Thank you. Is there any comment on the minutes? Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to ask a question about the commentary at 13920. This follows continuing concerns about editorialising in the minutes, where we say the Mayor explained that the Council calendar was finalised and would be agreed at an extraordinary Council meeting. I'm nearly sure the Mayor didn't say we would be agreeing something that would be predetermining a decision. So I think what he probably said, it would be presented at an extraordinary decision. I wonder if we could change that word, please.
Yes, we accept that. That will be amended. Thank you. Right, with no one else in the queue, we will put that to the vote. And that has carried 100%. Moving on to item 8, notice of motion in the name of Councillor Johnson on page 37. Now we have got an officer memo that accompanied this notice of motion, which we will take as read, but we have got officers coming down if there are any questions. So we do have a couple of questions. First up from Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you for the report, for the memo. I just have a question about when the council housing rental guidelines were adopted by council.
My understanding was that they were developed following the resolution in council, so I'm not sure if the actual document itself has gone to council. Julie, yeah, I might.
Yes, Julie, you can sit in for the Mayor at the moment and answer that question.
The answer to the question is that the guidelines were referred to in the 10-year plan documents as operational guidelines referencing the 2016 social housing strategy, where that 30% was first adopted. So they weren't explicitly presented to council as an individual document, but more as part of the supporting information of the 10-year plan.
Okay, so certainly when I looked for them, they were not on the website, but now they are, I note. So how would anyone have been aware what they were? I know they're referenced in the social housing plan, but prior to this issue arising, how would anyone have been aware what they were?
Do you know? I'm not sure. Not not sure. Do you know?
So the guidelines were based on the previously adopted 2016 social housing strategy. I think it's a fair question as to how that would have been presented, but I'm assuming, I mean, I don't run the social housing, so I'm imagining that the website contains information about housing rentals.
It does, but not calculation of rents. Okay, I'll move on from that. In terms of the rents increases for people on supported living, why in the table that was presented are there no figures? So it just says no change to formula, increase relates to benefit increase. For the others, we did have figures. Why are there no figures for that particular category?
There was no change to the formula for the supported living tenants. It was the same formula as used in previous years, and so therefore that information wasn't provided as part of the table because we were simply supplying information about the changed formula.
Okay, but in the single person, single unit, can fit double bed, there's no change to formula, but we got figures for that one? So it doesn't seem to be consistent.
I just note that the table that you're referring to has just come straight out of the notice of motion.
Yes, that's right, because it was the table that was given to me in answer to the queries that I put through internally before bringing the notice of motion. So it's the table that you supplied.
That's right, but it's not. All we've done is taken the table that was in the notice of motion and put it in the paper, so we haven't modified it at all.
Okay, so what is the formula for single people on supported living at the moment?
The formula remains the same as it has last year, which is 30% of the net weekly income.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Dingle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So on page, what page are we? On page 43, looking at 2.6, it talks about there being a financial consequence of unrealised revenue in delaying the rent review. Exactly how much are we talking about?
Approximately 60,000 for that period of time, taking us through to the 25th of January.
25th of January. And so when you're looking at, I guess I'm just trying to work out how much, I can see this in terms of each of the different categories, but I'm just trying to work out how much we're actually talking about big picture. So if the highest increase works out to be, $37 a week, and how many tenants do we have? Or do you have figures that tell us exactly how much per year this increase would be?
Sure. If we applied the formula as we had in previous years, simply based on an proportionate increase in tenants' income, the increase per annum would amount to about 90,000. By taking the formula up to 30% for the 90 or so tenancies that we're talking about today, that increases our per annum income or additional rental income up to 200,000.
Okay. Thank you, that's very helpful.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You talked about the 2016 agreement, and I can remember the 2016 debates quite clearly. They were very interested, and the council was quite split over them. But we agreed, and we came to a decision at the end, that we were going to hold the 25%. Now, the agreement there then, this is a question coming, the agreement then was all over market rentals and contributions towards the accommodation settlement. If we go up to the 30%, will you be looking at the residents that are going to WINS for the accommodation supplement? Is that the reason behind this move?
That's part of it. I suppose when we looked at it, there's another number of factors we took into account. So we obviously looked at the increases to incomes. We have looked at the way that the rentals were calculated previously across the different types of units, and we felt, looking at that there was an anomaly in how some of them were calculated between the 25 and 30%. And also, looked at the thresholds around the accommodation supplement, and what this does effectively do is move some of the burden around, I suppose, paying for the subsidised rentals from the ratepayer to the taxpayer effectively. So that was part of it. And so there is a sort of a number of people who will move into that category that then can get accommodation supplement.
Okay. Now, those people that are going to move from that, in that category that would be applying available for accommodation supplement, would they then be getting more in their hand, or after the rent is coming out, or would they be penalised and having less in their bank after the accommodation supplement has been taken out?
So there is a bit of a mix, and first of all, I would acknowledge that there may be some people who do apply and don't receive it, but for some they will end up with more. There is a category that ends up with, we calculate about $10 a week more in their hand because of the impact of that, and some who will certainly still have an increase, but it obviously reduces the amount of the increase substantially for some.
But particularly people on superannuation, they'll be penalised for it, wouldn't they?
Yes, for a couple, yes.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just, I guess, somewhat following up from those questions where you've begun to help us understand why this proposal's come through from staff, but I guess just wondering around the timing of it and sort of why now?
I suppose one of the reasons why now is well, first of all, there was a bigger increase than usual in the incomes for most of those people. There has been quite a lengthy delay in the increase. So normally the increases would happen once a year. So there will now be about a 7-month delay to that. So there's actually quite a long period. So I suppose we felt that there were a number of factors that meant that this felt like the right time to address what we considered to be an anomaly in the way some of the rents were calculated.
And I guess on the other side of that coin, was there some consideration around why it might not be great timing? Yeah, so I suppose we certainly did, and we thought about the impacts on people generally. As we know, we've across the council we've been pretty careful this year in terms of budgets and how much impact we have on rates, and we certainly did look, consider that as a factor. I suppose one of the things that we took into account was the fact that the people that are in those tenancies and are on government-supported incomes have been less affected than others in the community. So, and in fact, whereas some may have been hit by reduced incomes, in fact, the incomes for this people were put up more than others proportionately. So we thought all of those things taken into account, that it did make sense to do it now. So, thank you. Am I hearing correctly then that some of the rationale was around trying to compensate for, I guess, lower rates income from other parts of the community that were differently affected in 2020?
No. The point I suppose I was making was that I suppose the tenants had the benefit of of a longer period of not having of an increase. So instead of normally getting an increase 12 months, every 12 months, it was going to be 18, 19 months. So there was the, so if you think about the overall impact on people, it was going to be less than, say if we'd done it last year when, say, benefits didn't go up by very much, and then you tried to move and change those anomalies, it would have had a disproportional impact on people, whereas this time round, benefits had gone up by a larger amount. It had been a longer period since there had been an increase. So actually, our rationale was that the impact would be less than it would be in other times. So therefore, this was the right time if we were going to make this change.
Thank you. So just finally then, I guess, to understand if some of that rationale was around the 18-month gap, the 30% proposal, was that just a one-off and then it was going to go back to 25%, or was it an ongoing proposal?
This would be an ongoing proposal, so we would shift the formula, and then any changes from now on would be again in line with the increases in income.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When you were thinking this through, did you think of ring fencing any of the current tenants that would have an increase, and the ones that would get, like you said, there's more that some would get an extra $10 in their hand? Did you think about just ring fencing the one and then doing the 30% over a gradual sort of 5 years for lower impact?
Certainly, we did look at that and we did consider it. Our tenancies are reasonably stable, and our thoughts were that it would take quite some time to bring those figures up to par. And I was also very conscious that we have a number of other tenants who are already paying the 30%, and officers were looking to address the equity issue between those that are currently paying 25% and those that are already paying the 30% of their net weekly income.
So any new tenants like the ones that are going in next year, you will be setting them at the higher rate?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So just have a follow-up question, given your answers to Councillor Barrett and Councillor Beattie. Given that you were concerned about inequity between tenants, did it occur to you to put everybody in 25% instead of putting everybody up to 30%?
It was considered, but the financial impact on the ratepayer was also considered, and for that reason it was that a consideration was discarded at that point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris and Kerry and Julie. There's no further questions. So, councillors, the notice of motion that we've received has already been moved and seconded, and I'll invite Councillor Johnson to speak to that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And colleagues, I do feel that most of you understand where I'm coming from with this notice of motion. So I'm not entirely convinced that I need to do a lot of very good argument in favour of it. But nevertheless, I'm not going to take any risks. So bear with me if you already agree. First off, our social housing plan, our policy is around having a warm, safe and affordable housing for people on low incomes. So just to remind you that the people we're talking about are people on seniors in the community on superannuation with a community services card, and people with a long-term disability. And we have decided that we would make housing available for these people at an affordable rent. Now, generally, it's accepted that an affordable rent is 25% of income. That's what's accepted by government for Kāinga Ora. That's what's accepted by many community housing providers. And certainly, that's what I understood our formula to be. Now, when the Chief Executive advised us in an email on the 13th of November that the rents would be increased up to 30% of income for all of the subsidised tenants, I looked for the council housing rental guidelines to check. And although they're referenced in the social housing plan, they were not available online. They had not been adopted by council. In fact, I don't believe we had seen them at all since the long-term plan in 2018. And it did, in fact, take officers several days to be able to produce them for me. So I do feel there's been a lack of transparency to elected members on what the formula is currently, let alone the decision to increase it to 30%. So the reason that I feel that we shouldn't be doing this is that there's been no improvement to level of service. It's not as if rents are going up because we've given people a lot more for their money. In fact, people are still living in exactly the same unit as they were in the year before, with no increase to level of service whatsoever. And as Councillor Barrett alluded, it's been a difficult year. It's been a COVID year. We know actually that the impact of COVID has fallen more heavily on people with low incomes than it has on the rest of society. And I just think that in such a difficult year, with the future around COVID and the impact still quite uncertain, that this isn't the time to be making a substantial increase in the rents for our council housing tenants. The expectations are that social housing isn't a profit-making exercise. It's not a commercial venture. It's here to be a public good, to be a social service. And I don't accept that we need to be trying to squeeze more money out of the most disadvantaged people who we're offering housing to in the city. I'm not saying let's not have an increase in rent at all, but the increase in rent needs to be proportionate to the increase in income and remain at the previous formula. We're really giving people two increases here. They're already getting an increase in rent because their income has gone up, and we base our rent on their income. And then by increasing the formula from 25 to 30%, they're getting an additional increase. Some of these increases are up to 24%. Now, I know that if we were discussing the setting of rates and anybody proposed 24%, there would be just howls of objection around the table. And I don't see why it should be any different when we're discussing rents for social housing. 24% is not an acceptable increase. And even if you say, well, people can claim accommodation supplement, not all our tenants are eligible. Our asset requirements are completely different, our asset tests, than MSD. We allow people to have more assets, and therefore some of our tenants will not be eligible for accommodation supplement. And even if they are, accommodation supplement is only given at 70 cents in the dollar, so not all the increase is accommodated. My calculation was that some people, even with accommodation supplement, would still be getting an increase in their rents of 10%, which again, I don't think is acceptable. So I think that the whole premise on which this is based is unfair. I don't think that there's community support for this at all. And I would like you to support the motion that we retain the formulas that we used last year, and additionally, that we review the guidelines for council housing rents, because that has not come to us for approval, and I think that this is something that we should have our eyes upon, rather than it being hidden away as part of operations. Thank you.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillor Johnson has already spoken on most of what I would want to say, and I totally support her. One of the things I am a little bit different is I actually thought they were already paying 30%. So there is some confusion about between the 25 and 30, so that's why I'm definitely supporting number 2 so that we can review it. When we're looking at these rents, we gave our commercial businesses discount for rental, which was quite significant, and we didn't expect them to pay that back with increases, and so we need to have the same, we need to be the same here. And I agree definitely that if we are reviewing to go from 25 to 30%, we need to look at that as a separate review and keep these rents just the same. It's been a bad year, so let's be fair and consistent across all of our ratepayers.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Every time I hear the words market rentals, it just makes me shiver. especially when I think about pensioners who are living on a breadline in many cases. I just heard a comment from a staff member, oh, they got an increase in income. Well, that's a load of processed grass. Absolute load of it. Pensioners, in case you had forgotten, were helped with the increase in electricity costs. They had no other income whatsoever. Some beneficiaries got a $25 increase. Pensioners did not get an increase. They're on the same now as what they were this time last year, bar a little increase. When I look at the increase in the rate and the percentage increase, on a 30% increase, the rent increase is between 23.4 and 24.5%. We're going to increase the rates by 25% almost. Not the rates, their rent. Pensioners can afford that? I'm sure they can't. If we hold it at 25%, the increase will be 2.9 to 3.2, which is much more realistic. One thing that's happened today, I look around the chamber and I see a group of young people out there supporting pensioners. And that makes me feel absolutely fantastic that the future generation are aware of what rent increases can do to older people. It really, and I just thank you so much for just being there and showing your concern. I cannot and I will not support increasing costs to beneficiaries or to people who cannot afford what they're paying out anymore. Prices are going up all around this country at a ridiculous price, and housing is probably the leader in that. But for us to put money ahead of people, which we do quite a lot, in this case I can't support. And I don't think we should be putting any further pressure on beneficiaries, particularly people on super who gain so little over COVID, than what we are already. Why should we do this? Well, we can get some more money out of MSD, but the pensioners won't be getting any more. They'll be still paying more. I will totally support this notice of motion, and I would ask every councillor here to also support it and have a conscience for the people in our city who are most affected by these little things that we make. A loaf of bread a week, that's breakfast every day, just think about it.
Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So I agree with most of the comments that have been made already, but I just want to add my piece as well. Some of these people might not qualify for a benefit, and some of these people are entitled to benefits, but we all know that benefit levels have been keeping people in poverty for decades. The Welfare Expert Advisory Group gave central government 42 key recommendations to lift people out of poverty, and one of these recommendations was to increase benefit levels by 47%. That shows you how dire the benefit system is. There are people who might postpone, these are people who might postpone going to the doctor or the dentist until they actually end up in ED. These are the people who might wear all of their winter clothes so that they don't have to spend extra on heating. These are the people who might not get car insurance because they simply cannot afford to. All of them would have struggled through COVID. The isolation, the fear, not knowing what would happen if they went to the supermarket for their daily shop. It has been a tough year, and sending them a letter in the lead up to Christmas to say that their rent is increasing is possibly not the most compassionate thing we could have done as landlords. We took on social housing because our people needed somewhere to live. And now, as rental prices skyrocket, as home ownership reaches the worst level in 70 years, as our waiting list for housing exceeds 600 clients, the need to make sure that our people can afford to pay their rents is stronger now more than ever. As council, we actually cannot look at this as unrealised revenue. We need to look at it as people who have so much potential to contribute to our community if only we could stop kicking them while they're down. Moreover, the amount of money we're looking here is tiny in the grand scheme of things. Tiny to us, massive to those renters. We may have lost a potential $60,000 because of the COVID restrictions holding back this review, but actually we also approved $200K to help community groups through the COVID period. So, there's some balancing that happens there. All up, we are looking at an increase of $110K per annum coming from our most vulnerable people. So I'm happy to support Councillor Johnson's notice of motion because we as councillors should actually have a tighter control on the council rental policy so that we're not putting our staff in this position in the first place. We should be deciding on these rent increases, just like our processes around dog registration fees and increasing parking tickets.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and would certainly concur with much of what's been said around the table. But what I'd like to do is attempt to find whether there might be a silver lining around the COVID budget that we're working through in FY21. And I think, if anything, it's helping us see around this table where some of the gaps are in our policy, where we perhaps had some assumptions about things that are in fact now being tested. And I think it's also showing us the lengths that we're possibly prepared to go to in terms of searching for revenue. And I would say, what extraordinary lengths when it's nearly Christmas Eve and we're here in this chamber debating about whether or not we're going to take more money off of some of those in the community least able to afford it. What extraordinary lengths. And I'm so pleased that Councillor Johnson and Beattie have brought this to our attention and brought this notice of motion to us today. I find it quite disturbing that we would consider inflicting a sharp rent rise on those least able to pay, and I'm very keen to see us have the opportunity to reflect on the review that will be triggered by recommendation 2 to ensure that we don't end up in the situation that we are now, and that in fact our social housing tenants can get a good night's sleep, that we around this table actually can get a good night's sleep knowing that these sort of surprises aren't going to come and catch us again.
Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Johnson for a right of reply.
I don't think that will be necessary. Thank you.
The motions have been moved and seconded. Is everyone happy to take those together? Great. I'll invite you to vote. And that has carried 100%. We will now adjourn for a short break and be back in the chamber at 10:50. Right, councillors, we will resume our meeting. So we are now moving on to item 9, section 17A, review of economic development, and this is on page 47.
Good morning, Madam Chair, councillors. Madam Chair, I understand you've asked for the paper to be taken as read, so I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any questions? Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, David. My questions are really about some of the supporting material, so I don't know how well positioned you are to answer that, but I'll ask anyway, and I'm sure you'll redirect if needs. I was particularly asking questions about a number of comments in the report where it says mechanisms exist to make amendments. So talking about amending the shareholder model, for example, the report said mechanisms exist to do that. And I wonder if you could talk to us about the mechanisms that exist to make changes.
Well, the recommendation to make changes is to provide greater specificity in the statement of expectations.
So the mechanisms that exist that they're referring to here is the letter, the statement of expectations, and then
well, there could be other mechanisms in terms of changes to the contract or their shareholding or the actual broader other options that were assessed by GMD in the report. But the recommended option at this, the recommendation from the consultants for the Section 17A review was to retain the current CCO model, but and that was effective, but there was some improvements that could be made in terms of communications, relationships, and greater specificity in the statement of expectations on some particular requirements that the council may have, or councils.
Thank you. Another question I had was about the relationship manager, which seemed to be a concept that was well supported through the consultants' work as well as how we've operated locally. But I did wonder, is there any evidence that you're aware of that we run an in-house model? The relationship management is the general manager, strategy and planning for us. Are there any examples where that's an independent person that a council might contract relationship management?
I'm certainly not familiar of that, no. I'm not familiar with any examples where that's undertaken. Cheryl's given me a no. So.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, I'll leave it there.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just the recommendations that are on the screen are different to those in our papers. Mm-hmm. So are they already moved and seconded, or where have they come from?
So the recommendations on the screen are moved by myself and seconded by the Mayor.
So they're not the officer's recommendations?
No, these are the recommendations that were circulated to elected members. So these are, there is a component of these that are the original recommendations, and then there are a couple of additional points as well.
Okay. Okay, well then, if I could just address some questions to David, please. So, David, the officer's recommendations were around delegated authority to approve amendments to the Statement of Expectations. Is it okay to ask you about these alternative recommendations that have come up? Or do you feel able to answer some questions on those, or are you only going to answer questions on your officer recommendations?
Well, they're certainly not. So the recommendations on the screen, as the Chair pointed out, are not my recommendations, but if you had any questions about any of the implications of those recommendations, I'd be happy to answer those.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of, referring to the ones that are on the screen then, in terms of the implications, do we have any idea of the costs involved in doing A or B? Because there's no financial costs stated in that recommendation.
Well, certainly part of the challenge with A, and it's covered in the so in terms of 2A that's on the screen now, and it's covered in the material in the in the committee report is that I guess the destination marketing function of CEDA is actually quite intertwined with a whole lot of their other activities. So, for instance, a number of their other functions, they are required to market Palmerston North and the Manawatu for more than just tourism.
Okay.
So that's...
Now, in the papers, on page 50D, you said there's a risk that $700,000 strategic tourism, sorry, just lost the page, funding might be lost, would need to be returned or partially returned. Can you give us a bit more detail about that?
Yes, so the advice we've had from Linda Stewart, CE of CEDA, is that if there was any change in Council's contribution to CEDA, then the contract that CEDA has with MB would need to be reviewed, and they would need to look at that $700,000. I think the briefing paper that was circulated to all elected members by CEDA had a letter attached to it from MB indicating that that would be the case.
Yes, it did, but that hasn't been public document, so I just wanted that to be...
No, it's not a public document, but the report talks about the fact that that has been as a risk, yes. Okay. And in terms of the relationship with MDC and their spend on destination marketing, are you able to comment on the implications of on MDC? Well, one of the things I noted in my report at page 50, so 50 of the order paper, there's some implications of in-house delivery, anticipating that this resolution was going to come forward. One of those is that MDC will be forced to undertake destination marketing for the Manawatu themselves, or continue to do this via CEDA. So, you know, So there has been this, I guess, tension between Palmy and the Manawatu in terms of what is marketed and branded, and I guess the point I'm making is that MDC will still be required to make a decision about how it then markets the Manawatu as a destination, and it could potentially either do that through CEDA as a direct contract or do it itself, but MDC would be forced to make a decision if the council withdrew money, if the City Council withdrew money for its portion of that activity that CEDA undertakes on its behalf.
Okay, and what's our in-house capability at the moment in terms of delivery of A and B?
You can answer. I'll answer that. I'll take that question, Councillor Johnson. So we do have a marketing group. We would, and look, we would need to, if this was to go through for A, we would need to look at what the implications of that are and whether we would need to, whether it could be undertaken with our current resources or whether we would need additional resources. B, not so straightforward because we have, these events are regional events. They are not Palmerston North specific. So that discussion about whether they could be brought in-house into our organisation or contract managed by us would be a discussion and negotiation with MDC. So we don't know at the moment MDC's position on that, and we would need to have that discussion with them because that's part of the contract of CEDA. If they were to as a result of that come in-house, or we were to manage those contracts, I can tell you that certainly in my experience, professional experience of managing some very large events in bygone days, that they are resource hungry even when you are just managing the resource because or the contract, because ultimately it's your reputation that is at risk and they require significant resource. So we would need to understand what that was at the time.
Okay, so we shouldn't necessarily assume that the money would be saved. It might be more that the money would be reallocated. Is that a fair?
The money that came through wouldn't be saved, no. It would just be reallocated.
Yeah. Right. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
money.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, could you just start that again? We just have only just popped you back up on the screen.
Oh, okay. Okay. Kia ora, thank you, Chair. David, I'm unsure whether you've caught up on some of the activity discussions that have been ongoing in the last week, but you talk about the wider destinational marketing as being all in question. In fact, as the city-centric the notice of motion there on A is around the city-centric, the storytelling, the city part of the money. 90% is actually still, in our opinion, secure and ready to go. So can we unravel that a little bit?
Other than summarising my advice in the report, which I think is that the destination marketing component of CEDA's activities is intertwined with a number of their other functions. So I guess removing it is potentially challenging to the overall integrity of CEDA. Okay,
so you're okay with somebody else telling the stories of the city from an external organisation?
It's not a quick...
I'm happy to... I guess what I would say is if my advice has been... my advice is, is that if the best way for CEDA to tell the Palmy story better is to be very explicit about what you expect CEDA to deliver through the statement of expectations for Palmy.
Yeah, I understand that, and that's been the advice of yourself and your consultant colleagues as well. You spoke, and Councillor Johnson spoke about the advice from MB, and we've got CEDA's version of that. Have we got any independent advice from MB? Has anybody rung the Minister's office? And because this money is not being swapped out, it is not being saved, it is still being spent.
No. Well, when you say independent advice, we've had an email from the contract manager for MB that looks after that fund.
Yeah. And?
That contract manager indicated that the agreement or contract around the $700,000 would have to be reviewed if there was a change in CEDA's funding arrangements with respect to destination marketing.
In respect to destination marketing. Okay, thank you. And look, finally, Madam Chair, just one more. Is there any specific paperwork around clear lines of funding, contracts around our events and our partners with MDC?
Sorry, can you repeat that question, Grant?
Oh, sorry. Is there any specific paperwork, contracts and clear line of funding from our partners at MDC around events?
So the current contract has a approximately $600,000 contribution from MDC, and that includes a portion of the previous specific line items for the regional events, but that funding is now pooled in terms of MDC's contribution. So there was historically line items, but MDC's contribution for those three events that are within the suggested amendments is now within their overall contribution.
So I take it that it's just grouped together and there's no clear line of what they actually fund. They just say they fund it.
I'll answer that. I think that what MDC do is different to us. So we provide specificity around the amount that we actually fund, and you'll see that listed out, MDC bulk fund. So they just hand over the amount and it's used accordingly.
Yeah, I suppose it's just understanding what they do fund and what they don't fund, and that's my question. But it doesn't. That's fine. I'm not going to lose any sleep on it. I don't think it's been answered, but that's fine. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Butt. Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, David. David, if we've got issues around like the A and B, can we specifically make the contract so that like we can put it in there for a year and do a review? I know the contract's going to be 6 years. So can we build the contract around 1 year, that we do a review on those two specific items and that we can pull out if it's not been met? Because I know one of the issues was around the fact that this is 6 years.
Yeah, well, there's a bit in there. So the first thing is the statement of expectations. If you provide greater specificity within those, they're reviewed every 12 months. Certainly, as part of any contract, in the renewal of the contract for CEDA, you could put in place some additional clauses into that around regards to renewal. But just to be clear, this does not have to be 3, 4, 5 or 6 years. It can be whatever the council and MDC decide it to be. So it was initially, I think, 5 years, the contract, to allow for 2 LTP cycles. But there's no reason why the CEDA funding and the renewal of the contract could be tied to an LTP cycle and be 3 years with a renewal, with a review of certain functions of CEDA after 12 months or 24 months.
Yeah, I'm not worried about the 3 years.
Yeah.
It's just that, like, after a 1 year, if there's...
I just wanted to clarify that no decision being made today will tie the funding of this council to CEDA for 6 years.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Finlay.
I think I'm not sure the question's for either David or the CEO. If we brought this function back into council, what would be the reporting and accountability to this council? How would it be reported back to council, and what was the accountability on it as well?
Look, I don't think I could answer that appropriately off the top of my head, and remembering that this would not take effect till July next year, 2021, so we do have time in between that to work through some of those processes.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have several questions. One is, in regards to accepting these recommendations that are tabled today, what is the actual timeline where that we can stretch this out to before we accept a recommendation like this?
Well, the current contract with CEDA expires in June 2021. So we do need to move on the statement of expectations to allow CEDA to respond to that, and that's the sort of tail end of this contract. So there's some time early next year to make changes, but I think for all parties would be wanting certainty, leading into the LTP process about where the funding is going to sit.
Okay, just wanted to, so there is a possibility of moving it into the new year?
Sorry, I probably wasn't particularly clear about that. So there's two things. One's the contract and one's the statement of expectations. So the statement of expectations needs to be clarified the statement of expectations will inform the activities of CEDA from 1 July next year. But obviously the statement of expectations relates to the activities or functions you're asking them to do. So if there's a change to the contract, then there would need to be a change to the statement of expectations. The current statement of expectations are drafted on the assumption that CEDA will continue to provide the functions that it has, but we're suggesting you refine those to be more specific about the things where you want some more specificity, particularly around the destination marketing and the way in which CEDA collaborates with Palmerston North to market the city. So regardless of what you do with the contracts, you've got to finalise the statement of expectations relatively quickly.
Okay, thank you. In regards to the shareholding and the contributions that we make, has there been any review around the balance of our shareholding in relationship to our funding mechanism with the district?
There hasn't. No.
Okay. I think I'm happy with those questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And my question actually follows quite nicely from where Councillor Dennison left off and relates, I suppose, to some of the perhaps wider questions that we might consider around CEDA and reviewing. If we were to asked to consider the balance of shareholding between the city and the district and look at those overall shareholding relationships or arrangements. Is there any advice that you would have for us at this stage?
Yeah, I guess the first point I'd make on that is that the shareholding, I think, should be seen as a symbol or a signal of collaboration more than anything else. So it's currently a 50-50 shareholding, which indicates that the two councils want to work together and collaborate for the Manawatu. So I think that's the most important component of the shareholding arrangement. It's not that we're here to make profit or appreciate the city does put in a more substantial contribution than Manawatu, but the city's got more to gain as well and more to contribute because we've got a greater population. So I don't want to speak for MDC, and I know there has been some talk about the shareholding arrangement. As I said, I'm not speaking for MDC, but some of the very early indications we've had through their contract manager is I think MDC would seriously consider their ongoing involvement in CEDA if they were a minority shareholder. And again, I'm not speaking on behalf of Manawatu, but that's the indication I've had from their contract manager.
Thank you. That's helpful, Madam Chair. Councillor
Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And sorry to just pop in there, but it was a follow-up question around this shareholding issue. Is it the 50-50 shareholding that drives the 50-50 representation at Joint Strategic Committee? If the shareholding changed, would that representation change?
Not as far as I'm aware.
So how would that change?
Well, I guess representation at the Joint Strategic Committee would change in the way any other composition of a committee occurs. So there would be a decision of both councils about what the representation of that is. So I think if you were looking for different representation on the Joint Strategic Planning Committee, potentially greater PNCC representation, then that would be a discussion, presumably between the two mayors to start with.
Thank you.
Councillor Hapera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think if you look at recommendation 3, I think if it comes up on the screen, you'll see that is part of the discussion point that Councillor Barrett has brought up, which is the agreement, which is to do with the shareholder agreement.
Just to clarify, Resolution 3 does not cover the shareholding arrangement.
It covers the, I've just had a look at it, it does cover the service agreement, which covers the shareholder agreement. I just went in and had a look at it. Was produced in 2016.
But I think recommendation, with respect, recommendation 3 is referencing any changes in 2 above. So 2 talks about the in-house delivery of the destination marketing and the events, and then 3 says, as a result of any changes to 2, the Chief Executive be directed to negotiate in accordance with the intellectual and funding clauses of that agreement. So 3 is in no way signalling, make it clear, 3 is in no way signalling any change to the shareholding arrangement.
But yeah, 3 does talk about the funding and intellectual property clauses, so okay, thank you.
Yeah, just to clarify, so what 3 is saying is if you make the changes in 2, you need to make them in accordance with those funding and intellectual property clauses in the management of services agreement.
Councillor Finlay.
As David, I just wanted to just make it very clear in my own mind. At the moment, we have a 50-50 partnership with Manawatu, is that correct? And we put in 1.8 million and they put in 600,000?
Round about those numbers, yes.
And it's a 50-50 shareholder?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. There are no further questions. We do have an additional recommendation that will come from Councillor Barrett, but we'll just deal with what we've got first, and then I'll invite you to come back in case there are any questions around the implications of that subsequent recommendation. So the recommendations are moved by myself and seconded by the Mayor, and I'll open up for any comment. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I don't support recommendations 2 to 4, and I would just like to say that if they were to fail, I'll be happy to remove the officer's recommendations. I have spent a long time reading the reports, the Section 17A report, the other consultants' report, reading the information that was provided by CEDA, reading the information that was provided by the Mayor, and ultimately I have to make my decision based on the evidence in front of me, and the evidence in front of me at the moment doesn't give me any confidence that these recommendations would improve anything for the city. And in fact, I think they would probably spell the end of CEDA and damage the relationship that we have with MDC. So I won't be voting for them.
Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a lot of thoughts on this one. So we recently held the Section 17A review of CEDA, but that review wasn't on CEDA's performance. That was on the model. And it looked at the current model and whether it was the most cost-effective model. And its conclusion, this report, states that the review found no fundamental issues with the model itself. The majority of interviewees were of the view that issues would not be resolved by changing the model, so I don't think that we should go against the evidence before us and change that. But I also don't think that we should bring aspects of CEDA into our in-house at this stage as well, because that again would set a bad precedent for all the other CCOs. One that says we paid for professional advice and then we're going to do the opposite. There are definite issues. Throughout the report, you can see how much sway and influence the wider Manawatu has on this review and on CEDA itself. When CEDA talks about its outcomes, like the talent pipeline, they worked with the National Driving Training Centre, Central Skills Hub and Talent Central. Even the Hokkaido Board of Education went out and visited Fielding High School. That's all fantastic work, but they're really all fielding-based or wider Manawatu focused. This review also had internal interviewees from CEDA, PNCC and MDC, but then they were instructed to talk to the Manawatu Chamber of Commerce, which had businesses in Fielding and Palmerston North, Fielding and District Promotion, which is just Manawatu, and Federated Farmers, which is mostly in the wider Manawatu. So I was actually at that meeting and I was kicking myself because I couldn't think of an appropriate Palmerston North-based organisation that could provide a bit more balance in that. And I think there lies the problem. We know that CEDA has done a lot of work. We can see that in the long reports that come to Council each year. But it's hard for us as Palmerston North councillors to see the difference between the work that they do in Palmerston North and the work that they do for the wider Manawatu. And I've heard the arguments that what is good for the Manawatu region is good for Palmerston North. But actually this isn't entirely true when we don't have clear data that shows us our return on investment of the $1.9 million Palmerston North ratepayer dollars. I don't mind the wider Manawatu getting the CEDA attention, but in the interest of balance, I do think that we need to match our investment with our shareholder impact, including our representation on the Joint Strategic Committee. I think that is something we should look at. 75% of council funding should really equal 75% of shareholder rights. And in this report, it says that there is a view that MDC have deliberately stepped aside to allow more focus on PNCC. And one interviewee noted that one of the biggest barriers for CEDA is that they have 2 masters. So I sympathise with CEDA on this. It's a tough position to be in, and this year has actually been tougher than most. They've had to deal with COVID, and from most reports, they did that particularly well. It's been a big year for them. It's actually, dealing with COVID has probably actually been one of their better years, I have to say. And they also have new board members who have needed to hit the ground running. So we need to give that a chance. In the Meneth Consulting Review, we looked at bringing some of these functions in-house, but it says that CEDA was surprised because there was no detailed focus in the current letter of expectation to amplify the urban city identity of Palmerston North. Now, I would have thought that knowing that we were a majority shareholder, that would have had a bit of balance there. But in saying that, those are my expectations. That wasn't my direction to CEDA. So I think what we need to do is follow due process and actually have a conversation about what it is that we're all expecting here. And let's make the shareholding arrangements clearer, majority of funding, majority of influence, better direction for CEDA, and possibly move that regional narrative to a Palmy and Manawatu message domestically, then maybe we would get more Palmerston North flavour in our reports for successful outcomes. But I think doing this doesn't actually solve any problems.
Councillor Hapara.
Point of clarification, Madam Chair. Just wanted to understand, we're talking about the recommendations you moved, seconded by the Mayor, and that they're not what's on the screen, I believe. I think that's, if what you've put forward is lost, this is picked up as a notice of motion by Councillor Johnson. So I just want to clarify what we're debating here, because this looks wrong to me. These are the officer's recommendations, and I believe you moved alternates.
No, so the officer recommendations are only 1A, B and C, and what we've moved is 1, 2A and B, 3, 4, 4A, 4B, 4C. So what is on the screen is correct. And this, what is on the screen has been copied and pasted from the email the Mayor sent elected members. So it is the same recommendations.
Could I just ask, just if we can refer back to the first slide then, please, just so we can focus our attention.
Sorry, Madam Chair, also point of clarification. In the papers that I have from Hub, there are 2 recommendations to Council from the officers. One is that Council retains the current economic development model, and the other is that the Mayor and CE, etc., be delegated authority to approve amendments to the Statement of Expectations around A, greater specificity, B, the collaboration, and C, accommodating changes to the contract. So recommendation 2 from the officers looked very much like the recommendation 4 that you just had up on the screen, and I wondered if that was your intent. So if you just flick up.
If you just give us a moment, we'll just double check. Thank you.
Those ones there.
The recommendations in front of us are correct. So there are, to be very specific, is that in recommendation 4, 4A has a focus on regional tourism functions rather than destination marketing and regional tourism functions, and C, rather than focusing on the contract, focuses on the services funding agreement and agreement in relation to management of services agreement, which are official names. So all the recommendations on the screen are correct.
Well, they're what you intended to move?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Just as another point of clarification, Madam Chair, just being alternate, and I'm happy to take your direction, but I just wondered if you wanted to speak to those alternates as to why you're putting them up.
I'm reserving my right to speak.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hapara.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm supporting these recommendations, as I did support them at the joint strategic meeting. The reason why I am supporting them is, and I do support the work that CEDA does, so I do want to say that, and I do support all the people that have come here today, so thank you for coming along today. I do think overall the work that CEDA does is very, very valuable for our community, and I want to say that in the first and forefront. It's really hard to say this, being the Chair of Economic Development to this community, but I do think that what we've got in front of us is we are looking to try and refine a few things here, and we are looking at it from a point of view of bringing just a few things in-house, and that is the destination marketing. It is also the delivery of the business awards and the sorted and that's the only other one there. Just to clarify it, because I know that Councillor Dennison was wanting to have that clarification. I think the specificity, and I hate that word, but of the tourism function needed to happen in the contract, and I think that's what we were looking at when we go back to do the contract, so that's what we were looking at as well. We are trying to refine a few things in terms of the CEDA contract. So I am supporting all 4 recommendations. I think Councillor Barrett is going to put up a further recommendation in terms of the contract, of the shareholding contract, which I think is a really good recommendation going forward, but that is to do with our relationship with MDC going forward. But I am supporting all 4 recommendations. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's been good to hear the contributions from elected members so far in terms of where they sit on this. And I will start by saying that I do have some sympathy, and I think for the mover and seconder of the alternate that is here on the screen, and that I think we all always, anytime we look at an organization and a collection of work, we can always see places where there might be what could be perceived or assumed to be opportunities to make tweaks or changes that could, in our own minds, perhaps improve the overall situation. However, I don't think that what we have in front of us here actually is one of those cases, and I think actually sort of jumping to a conclusion around starting to take work off CEDA, starting to disassemble CEDA, would actually potentially have some quite serious impacts that I don't think we've really got our heads around, and certainly the advice that we've gotten now from multiple sources on repeated occasions suggests that actually the model and overall is quite well suited, and we just need to make sure that we are doing our duty as elected members to make sure that there is sufficient specificity and engagement with CEDA around our expectations in terms of the city. So I am not in a position, therefore, to support the recommendations from the Deputy and Mayor, and as others have signaled, would support the alternate recommendations from the officer's report. I do think that before we would ever go into the sort of territory that is being proposed here by the Deputy and the Mayor, we would really want to be really certain that we'd actually looked at the whole picture and asked all the fundamental questions. And I do think there's some fundamental questions that we have yet to ask, and that is the direction that we'll be going when we consider the additional recommendation. In closing, there's just, it's really easy to just look at an event or words like destination marketing as a bit of a label and think that it's really easy to just swap it from category A, CEDA, to category B, PNCC. The reality is that everything around destination marketing for the city is connected to every other part of CEDA, and if we try to pluck that out, we will end up having a whole lot of unintended and I believe quite negative consequences for the city and for the region, and we are best to not proceed down that path at this stage. Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'm just going to make a brief comment at this stage. So I am supporting the recommendations that I've moved, similar to Councillor Hapere, as I did at the Joint Strategic meeting recently. And the reason that we have come to this position is because there was a direction from elected members who were very unhappy in a quite strong conversation that was had that said something needed to change. And in actual fact, there were some elected members who were keen to review the funding arrangements as a whole rather than just considering a piece of it. And this was seen as actually, let's just hold fire, let's pull back on a little bit, bring some stuff in-house, align it with the really exciting branding and launch that has happened for the city marketing that's underway, and go from there. The feedback from a couple of key events that we as elected members have had to face over the last couple of years has meant that as well we might need a bit of a closer eye on things, and this is one way to do this. As was mentioned through some questioning, this doesn't necessarily result in the council running these events ourselves. It could mean that they are, some of these are contracted out anyway. It could mean that contracts remain. But what we are asking for is actually a greater oversight for a very small component of the current operations. And so that is why we are looking at these recommendations. This has come from conversations with elected members, and I would encourage you to support it. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be supporting number 1, and so I'll ask that these be taken separately. I won't be supporting 2, 3 or 4, and give notice. I think Councillor Johnson has signalled that she would move the alternate recommendations from the officer's report. I would certainly be very happy to second those. My problem here, excuse me, is the process that we're using to do this, I think, is flawed. The Section 17A report looks at delivery and a model, and the consultant report on that recognised that there are some issues, which I think we all know, but recommended that the model was fit for purpose. In fact, by far the best fit for purpose for what we're trying to achieve. The report said that mechanisms exist to deal with the issues that elected members have surfaced. And I have to say, elected members have surfaced some concerns in offline discussions. There's been no direction through this chamber to engage in this conversation. And until that happens, that's not the process that we're in. The process was about the model, and so I support 1, retaining the current model. The mechanisms that exist include taking that good, strong look at the statement of expectation, which absolutely I support. The report recognised that the issues that were being flagged were about unrealistic expectations from elected members that were outside of the statement of expectation. Our unrealistic expectations. If we want to change that, we need to do it through the statement of intent. The report also flagged that elected members had a slightly overarching drive to get involved in the how of delivering some of this work, entirely inappropriately for a governance-to-governance relationship. If we want better line of sight, then the CCO is by far our best way of doing that. You bring something in-house, we'll never see it again. We all know that. CCOs turn up regularly to report. Things that happen operationally get hidden away into lines of budgets that might or might not come through. Line of sight is best achieved through a CCO. Direction is best achieved through a CCO. I'd certainly support more regular meetings. I'd like to see, I recognise there are regular meetings going with the lead team. That doesn't include elected members from either council. I'd like to see an opportunity once a year to meet and discuss and have those full and frank, but that can all be taken within the existing model. The CEDA model stands on 3 pillars: destination marketing, talent attraction and economic development. Those things can't be taken apart. The report said that if we want to do that, we'd need a separate review. So this is a problem looking for a solution, in my view. It's not a solution to anything in itself. I value CEDA's independent voice. I think what we hear is that government, Wellington, values an independent voice, not just every little council running down to Wellington to have a conversation about things. CEDA serves us really well behind the scenes. And I hear that that's the problem. People would like some of those things to be surfaced, but that doesn't mean they don't do a good job. I'm voting against this because what it is death by 1,000 cuts. We can't do this to an organisation that's predicated on 3 branches to its work and expect it to continue successfully. It's short-term politics at the expense of long-term economic development and the success of our region. And councillors, I'd urge you to vote against it and support the officer's recommendation.
Just a clarification, the lead team consists of mayors, deputy mayors and chief executives, so there are already elected members involved.
Thank you. I meant all elected members.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have difficulty with this whole CEDA thing, and goes way back to destination, how it went. And I look at the fact that 2% of our rate take goes to CEDA. 2% of what our ratepayers pay to us as a council goes to CEDA, and I have so many ratepayers have come to me over the years and say to me, what do we get in return for that? I have great difficulty in answering that question. And I look around the people on this table and I say, how can you answer that when someone says to you, this organisation that we give 2% of our rates to, what do we get back for that 2% investment? And that's the bottom line. I've got people who are living on the breadline who speak to me regularly, and I've got people who are millionaires that speak to me. And they both ask the same question. What do we get back for the 2% rate investment? Because it comes out of their pocket, not ours. Well, we're ratepayers too, I suppose. I am going to support these recommendations because I believe the ratepayers need to know where their money has been spent. And there has to be accountability to our ratepayers as to where we spend our money. I'm a councillor and I get a fair bit of information from CEDA stuff, but I still honestly can't say where that 2% of our rates has been spent. Can anybody around this table?
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was referencing back to the questions being posed in informal settings. I think it's quite healthy to consider, are we getting value? Have we considered the options? And what are the outcomes that we've managed to achieve and what would or could be possible? And so they're fair questions to ask. And when we're looking at the proposition of the extension of the CCO being CEDA, in this case, there's a couple of concerns that I've had through this process. One is that I would have preferred to have an informal setting, a workshop setting with just the council, just the city, not necessarily joint with the district, because I think we've got different objectives that we're wanting to achieve and different ambitions on the sites that we've set, and that would be one, having an opportunity where we could actually flesh this out from a city perspective. I think from the response from officers, there seems to be an opportunity early in the new year for us to do that. And that would be my desire to do that before we start making some decisions in cement. The other one is around the Joint Strategic Planning Committee and just where the city puts its position and casts its votes. And at the moment, it's very independent from the members around the table, and it would have been preferable to have a city viewpoint put forward that was supported by all members at that table. And unfortunately, that hasn't existed in the past, but I believe it's something to consider when we've got decisions on the scale of the CCO review on the Section 17A. So that's another weakness that I think has been highlighted in this process, and I'd like to hope that we could address that moving forward. There is another item that will come forward around, potentially still come forward around the shareholding and our contribution, and I had questions back 6 years ago around the 50-50 split. I'll leave that if we end up bringing that to the table, but that's still something that I think is needing further conversation on. Therefore, we're left with the options before us here, and I'm actually have some alignment to supporting them because of the limited levers that we have. I know there's been attention drawn back to the statement of expectations being more clearer and being more specific on what we're wanting to achieve, and I'd look to gladly to participate quite actively in that process so we do get some clarity in what we put forward. But nevertheless, I think we've still got some other options around what else have we got as leverage, because when this was established, we were doing it on the basis of having a step change in the governance and the profile and the influence that could be achieved on the governance board. We're also having expectations of a step change in the operation with some of the tactics and strategies to elevate the city's profile and performance. In it, because the wider objectives of CEDA have meant that we also cover territories like Wanganui and Ruapehu and get government contracts for those territories, and I think that's great. But a question mark that still remains for me is whether we as a city are offsetting the overhead of the organisation for that work, or do they contribute and pay its way? And that's some of the questions I'd have. I'd love to have some transparency on that, that it's for us putting in the lion's share. I take it that when the tide rises, all ships rise too, but I'm just wanting to ensure that the city is getting the best outcome from our major investment. And with the results that we've been managed to achieve with our own marketing and comms team, by lifting the new identity Palmy slogan and brand, I think that's a real opportunity for us to leverage off. And likewise with those events, we've actually run some events in the past quite well, and I believe anyone could be contracted to run the events that we currently have sitting inside CEDA. So I don't see there's any major risks in moving in this direction, but it does signal more intention that we want a step change in the results and communication and relationship and all those other outcomes around specificity that was highlighted in those officers' reports. I'm probably banging on 5 minutes, Madam Chair, but thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr Mayor.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. Look, thank you very much for the opportunity just to say a couple of things. Look, I think it's, first of all, I understand there's just about everybody from CEDA is in the gallery, so hello to the team there. I want to convey my thanks to the board and management and the team for the work you do in making our city more prosperous. What we are doing here, though, is actually checking out what we're going to do for the next 6 years. So there does need to be some understanding. It's just not a simple rollover. I want to give you some understanding that I would like to push forward and give you security for the next 6 years. And in essence, this is not about changing 90% plus of your funding allocation. It's about the city wanting to tell its own stories. And things have moved on in the last 6 years, as Councillor Dennison has just alluded to. And like Māori, we would like to tell our own story and not have somebody else tell that for us. We will certainly work in with you, and I have a little bit of a quote here from Rangatane a little bit later. Events, I think there needs to be better communication around those, and I imagine that they'll probably still stay with CEDA, or the majority will. But we do need a better understanding and communication. There needs to be some specific contract management around those, understanding who funds what, or in some cases who doesn't fund, and I believe there's no paperwork there at all. And I've tested that, and officers could not find the paperwork. So that needs to be tighter. Around, for instance, elected members need to understand the New Zealand Agri-Food Week, for instance, is going to move its date. It's going to move away from growers, food and fibre. It's going to go towards an academic and government audience. Now, that might be okay and might be right, and that might be where we're going to head. But elected members need to understand that's where we're going, or I should say that's what's been decided for us. So what I'm trying to do is bring back a little bit of that decision-making into us. Now, I understand you've seen and heard a lot of information, elected members. Some of it is, I would say there's some misinformation amongst it all, and I'm sticking up for the ratepayer and some accountability. I just want to mention a couple of key words, and I know you know that I'm big on this, and it's around the behaviour. If you're happy with what has happened and happening, then don't vote for this. But if you think there needs to be a level more of integrity and who do people actually serve, then please vote for these notices of motion. A little bit of background. I've been one of the chief architects in forming CEDA 6 years ago, and it was with the former MDC, Mayor Margaret Cavalis, and I do truly want them to succeed. It's so important for the city, the wider region, and our community's prosperity. We gave this entity the best possible start. We threw in the reserves from Destination and Vision Manawatu. That was hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we fund them well on a healthy tourism, economic development and event funding package, plus MDC's portion, and there's been some clear pathways for external funding as well. Now, hindsight's a great thing, and we did throw everything into them. The core funding, the spearhead contract that existed in those days, factory and innovation funding, and contracted events, as well as the eyesight. And over the last 6 years, approximately $2 million each year has been going to CEDA. And that should continue going forward. As I said, 90% of that is where we want to go. I'll talk about the notices of motion. Really, the city's what I call storytelling and marketing and contracted events coming back to the city are relatively small items in the bigger scheme. They've been painted as we're taking everything away. That is not true. And it's around the city centre marketing should be viewed by government and MB as actually positive, because the money is not getting saved. It's just going to be spent and spent in the right areas. We're not meddling with economic development at all. In fact, all we're asking for is a little bit more accountability. So I think to expect a rollover or no comment is rather naive. And remember, councillors, this is a $12 million total funding decision over the next 6 years of ratepayers' money. And there's always going to be services that CEDA have offered over the last 6 years that might change. Now, I just want to say that the process does signal how hard it is to change multiple-year CCO contracting environments, and there has been resistance everywhere. And look, I don't blame CEDA for some of this. The contract and the way things have been set up perhaps could have been better. But as council's represented on CEDA's lead team for the last 6 years, I do want to say that we've got to get things better. We've got to be more aligned. And in the last few days, I've spoken to the Chamber, to Danielle Harris from Rangatane, to Adrian Broad, the founder of Sorted, to Paul O'Brien, who has over 25 years' experience in the Business Awards, and to Lance Bickford, who was the founder of the New Zealand Agri Week, for their thoughts. And it's actually been an interesting and worthwhile exercise to do. There's lots of documents and where things have originated from that have been forgotten about, the origins of events and actually the origins of CEDA. So I would just like to say that we've got to collaborate more, and as the main shareholder, we've got to have more say. Our notices of motion around the city marketing money coming back into the city, it's small, circa 200,000, and it gives our new identity and strategic city messaging around Food City some real resource. And like Māori, and Rangatane said this to me, we don't like external voices telling our story, so why are CEDA telling your story? You should be saying it and telling it yourself. So obviously we want to do this, but in conjunction with CEDA. The second notice of motion is around returning external events. Now I believe Sort It, Agri-Food Week probably can stay with CEDA, but we need a better understanding of what they're doing. As Mayor, I don't currently have that. I think the Business Awards should go back to their rightful and original owner, which was the Chamber, and they carry these out pretty well all over the country. So I will just finish really with, and look, this is about, ultimately, I don't want to undo CEDA. In fact, totally the opposite. I want them to get stronger and have some clear direction. And I do think there's an opportunity for a win-win here for both organisations. And look, please, I welcome your support on these notices of motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick point of clarification. The Mayor made a comment around requesting information around funding lines that hadn't been given. It's the MDC clarification that has been requested because they do bulk funding. There are no clear lines of sight around what they fund for each event. That's what he was referring to. The information provided by our staff had been given. Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Last week I didn't vote for this, and this week I'm not going to either, and I have more evidence not to. We can sort this out through our statement of intent and our contract. We can be quite specific, and as the officer pointed out, we don't have to have a 6-year contract. If we wanted to, we could have a 1 by 2 year contract, so we can set the contract to sort out the issues that we seem to have evolved in the last few weeks, which some of them I wasn't aware of. CEDA gets around 1.8 million. If you take away 200 here and 300 there, you're taking away nearly a third of CEDA's funding, and you're going to undermine that whole organisation, and I'm not prepared to do that. We've had consultants reporting, 2 consultants that have said the model's okay. So it's back to talking about the contract and the SOE, Statement of Intent. There was the one key thing here that keeps coming through is transparency and communication. So let's sort those 2 things out, and to me it shouldn't be hard. Obviously the lead team situation, it's obvious to me that there's issues. So we need to sort out how we're going to manage this contract with transparency and the right communication. So let's sit down and sort that out before we destroy an organisation that we put into place 6 years ago. And everybody's commented they do not want CEDA to dissolve, but by doing what you're doing and voting for this, you are going to undermine this organisation. You're not going to save any money. In fact, it's going to cost you money. Our CEO has already said that we haven't got the order they want to bring in events into the city. And we've had internally, sorry, I didn't mean into the city, I mean in-house. And we've had events done by our council internally previously that haven't been great either. So let's sit down with CEDA, work it out what it is we want delivered and get that sorted, and don't destroy the organisation.
I'm now going to exercise my right of reply. Look, there's been a lot of dramatising of comments today. If you look at some basic maths, approximately 1.8 million in the current CEDA contract, looking at bringing a few 100,000 back in-house is not 1/3. What we're talking about here is looking at an opportunity to enhance our destination marketing as a city. It's about telling our own stories. It's being able to control the narrative and considering our branding that we've recently launched, it's capitalising on that opportunity. The events are a separate issue, and it's about having better oversight over those. This is a very small component of CEDA's operations, and we are talking about taking better control over how we tell our story as a city. I think that there is an opportunity to explore this further through our long-term plan. There is an opportunity to review this. There's always an opportunity to review this. And at the moment, considering the frustration that is coming from elected members over the years around the value for money, the clarity of sightlines, that this is the best decision to make at this point. So I would urge you all to support it. And with that, we will be putting, separating item 1, recommendation 1 out. We'll be voting on recommendations 2 to 4 first, and then coming back to 1.
Madam Chair, just before we vote, can we just see 3 and 4 again, just if we're going to do it in a block? Thank you.
Great, that has carried 9 in favour with 6 against. We'll now look to recommendation 1, that the council retains the current economic development CEDA CCO model. And I don't think we'll need any further comment on that, so we will vote. And that has carried 100%. Thank you. We are now going to adjourn for lunch, and we will be back in here at 12:40.